So this second series is targeting the spine. Now you can't completely isolate the upper and lower bodies away from another. You can't completely isolate the hips and the legs away from the spine, but you can change an emphasis in your practice. In this particular series of postures, the emphasis is on the pelvis, sacrum, and the spine, rather than so much how much to twist or bend and rotate the hips. So hence it's called spine series. Starting first with butterfly pose. Bring the soles of the feet together. Move the feet forward to some comfortable position. And then slowly bring your head down towards your feet, placing your arms and your hands wherever it feels most comfortable. Some people like to hold on to their feet and pull themselves gently down. Other people simply extend their hands, palms forward, and just the weight of their arms gently coaxes their body forward. Either of those positions is fine. What's important is not to be tempted to bring your feet in real close to your body and to be aggressive about pushing your knees down and out. That is a perfectly legitimate variation. It's a perfectly legitimate and beneficial stretch. But since this is the spine series, we're not trying to exaggerate the stretch on the legs. We're trying to exaggerate the stretches and the stresses on the pelvis and the spine. So relax your efforts towards how wide or how far down you might be able to push your knees. Let your knees ride at any comfortable height. And be more concerned with relaxed, easy breathing, sinking down and forward, feeling the stretches in your sacrum, your lumbar spine, your thoracic spine, and possibly even your neck. Nice and easy and relaxed. Anytime we want to stretch the back of the spine, we must round the spine. If the spine muscles are engaged and the spine is straight, we cannot stretch the back of the spine. Now, in forward bends, of which, because this is the spine series, we have a great number of minutes in forward bending and backward bending, it frequently occurs that hanging the head forward in one 5-minute pose after another becomes too strenuous. Some people just get headaches or unpleasant tensions in the upper spine and head by letting the head hang and stretch. If you're one of those, then at any time you feel that you need the relief, go ahead and raise your head up and keep your head up for a while, for as long as you feel the need. And then when you feel that you're okay and nothing's been overstressed, go ahead and drop your head down again. Now, as in all these rules of thumb and bit of advice, nothing applies to everybody. For some people, the longer they keep their head down, the deeper they sink into the pose. With every breath, they feel better and better and better, and they feel the tension unwinding from their body. But it's never that way for everybody. People being so different in their constitution and construction that what's beneficial for one person can be overmuch for another. So don't try to be a hero. If you start to have unpleasant stresses, unpleasant fullness and pressure in your head or your upper back or your neck, just engage the muscles and raise your head up for a while, for as long as you feel the need. Then if and when there's time, you can drop your head down again. But the upper spine and the neck are secondary to the lower spine and the pelvis. Raising your head up or dropping your head down is not going to have much of an effect one way or the other on the stresses of your rounded lower spine. As is always the case, 4 minutes into a pose does not feel the same as the first minute when you got into it. So, as you progress in a posture, as your body changes and melts and yields to the stresses of the posture, an adjustment of your feet, an adjustment of your knees, a slight different hand movement, this is normal. There's no need to inhibit these occasional slow adjustments. It's not fidgeting to occasionally adjust to a slightly deeper, more comfortable place. Because hopefully your body is changing even now as we speak and you're sinking into the pose. And slowly come up, please. Just a brief respite now. Place your hands behind you. Stretch your legs out in front of you. We call this the hammock as you lay back on your hands or lay back onto your forearms and elbows. You can bring your legs up if you wish. You can twist your legs from side to side. The inevitable consequence of doing long yin postures is blood and qi stagnation. So it's normal to feel a little bit sort of tight and ginked up after a long pose. And just a few brief movements, contracting and pointing your toes and your ankles and moving your hips from side to side, just a little respite to move the blood and the qi can be very helpful and make it easier and more comfortable and more pleasant to move from one long yin pose to another. And now, half butterfly pose. If you'd stretch your right foot forward and pull your left foot in near your groin. And reach down, take hold of your foot or your ankle, or lay your hands palms alongside. And gently bring your head down. And again, typically in forward bends, because the emphasis is the spine, I will coach you to bring your head down and to round your spine. But you can always do too much of a good thing. Okay? Particularly as I emphasized in the first butterfly posture, for some people, for some significant slice of the population, one long, slow stretch on their neck after another gets to be too much after a while. For other people, it's heaven on earth. But in all of the postures, in all of the suggestions that I might make, you always must monitor yourself. It should not be your experience that stresses at an unpleasant level are building and building and building. Now, as I said in the beginning, this is a spine series, but intimately related to the spine are the hamstrings. We're not going to be twisting and opening your hips, but it is necessary for us to address the flexibilities of the legs as we address the flexibilities of the spine. They're intimately connected. Some people find it harder to stretch their back. Some people find it harder to stretch their legs. People vary. And in all the forward bends, whether it's one leg or two legs or legs bent or legs straight, in all forward bends, there are two fundamentally complementary techniques that you might use. And the premise is, are you trying to increase the stress and the therapeutic effect on your legs, or are you trying to increase the effect and the therapeutic stress on your spine? Typically, you cannot do both at the same time. If you wish to increase the stress, the therapeutic traction on your legs, the way to achieve that end is to first elevate your head and your chest, engaging strongly the muscles of the spine. These muscles have now splinted the spine so it does not round. Keeping those muscles engaged, try to tilt your pelvis forward by pressing your chest out and over. Using your spine in this way using your spinal muscles, tilts the pelvis more aggressively. And you get a better stretch, a more complete stretch, a more powerful stretch on your legs and your groin. And it's invigorating and feels good for the spine to engage the muscles. But now the back of the spine is no longer stretching. The contraction of the muscles prevents the spine from stretching. So if now your intention shifts and you would rather increase the traction on the spine, you would relax the muscles of the spinal column, exaggerating that effect by dropping your head, which pulls the spine over into a more rounded position. It is the rounding of the spine, whether it's the neck or the mid-back or the lower back. It is the rounding of the spine and that exaggeration which stretches and decompresses the spine. So whether it's one leg at a time, as in this half butterfly pose, or two legs at a time, or soles of the feet together, all forward bends share this characteristic. By making a muscular effort, do we exaggerate the tilt of the pelvis and increase the effect on the legs? Or do you relax the muscles of the spine and deliberately round and stretch the spine, which diminishes somewhat, some little amount, the tilt of the pelvis, but increases proportionately the therapeutic beneficial decompression of the spine? Slowly come up, please. You might rest back for just a few moments in the hammock pose again if your spine needs a break. Any subtle movements or contractions that you feel naturally impelled to do to relieve any chi or blood stagnation. And then we attempt the opposite side of the half butterfly pose. The left leg is extended forward, and the right foot is pressed in against the inner thigh. Bring your body over and down, walking your hands towards your foot or your ankle, taking any grip that feels comfortable to you. And once again, I remind you that if you find that this leg is tighter or looser than the other side, or if this hip is tighter or looser than the other side, or if this side movement of your spine is tighter or looser than the other side, this is the norm. This is how it is. Some of these imbalances are due to energetic and muscular tensions in the connective tissue and the fascia and the muscle. But some of these imbalances are due to the very structure of your bones, which is why those imbalances developed in the muscles. So some of the asymmetry we can address in our yoga practice. It's one of the powerful benefits of our yoga practice, is to relax the physical and energetic asymmetries that we have, that we're born with. But some of the asymmetries are always going to recur and will not ever be permanently overcome. That's why the magic of yoga, if there is one, is persistency and consistency. It's not the heroic efforts that we make in any one class that may or may not overstrain and overtax us. It's the methodical, mature, patient practice regularly. Because even the most flexible among us, who long ago in their yoga practice achieved the ultimates of their unique ranges of motion, every day, just being alive and thinking and breathing and working and feeling the emotions of being alive, their different tissues tighten up on them. And so they continue in their yoga practice, not because they're ever going to, quote unquote, become aesthetically better at the pose. That day is long past. Advanced yogis continue in their practice not for aesthetics. Advanced yogis continue in their practice because we must patiently and methodically unwind ourselves, the tensions in our minds and the tensions in our bodies. Stretch the muscles one day, the next day they're different. Work the fascia deeply one day, a week later they're different. The soft tissues of the body in particular are uniquely changing all the time, depending on how we think, what we eat, the kind of work that we do. The soft tissues of the body are shrinking and contracting. Coaxing them open, patiently, methodically, and unhurriedly, is part of what a yoga practice is about. And it is much different as you age with yoga. The huge benefit of aging with yoga is not that you don't feel the poses anymore. It's just that a beginner has to work much harder to open their body in the first place. Their practice must be more consistent and persistent. The advanced yogi gets to their open position more easily and more quickly. But each day, literally each day, the spine must be coaxed open again. The hamstrings and the energy channels of the legs must be coaxed open again. The thighs and the hips and the groins must be coaxed open again. It's not the heroic effort, it is not the heroic sacrifice that in the long run has yoga work its magic. In the beginning, it is true, can be sometimes so difficult that it seems like it will always be a heroic, painful, stoic discipline. But thank God, the good news is, at some point, at some time, you can relax pushing so hard and relax and enjoy into your practice for what it is. And relax for a moment. All the way onto your back. Just relax. A brief respite. When you relax on your back, you probably have a deep urge to moan softly to yourself. This is normal. Okay? This is a sign of success. Remember what is unique about a yin practice. It's not the stretch on your muscles that makes yin yoga unique. Yang yoga, martial arts, and ballet, they all stretch your muscles too. What's unique about yin yoga? What is the unique effort that we make in yin? Not better, not superior, just what's unique about it. What's unique about it is we're trying to pull your bones apart. If you succeed, you should momentarily, temporarily, feel fragile and vulnerable. If you have succeeded in relaxing the muscular rigidity enough to allow the joints of the body to take the stresses of these poses, momentarily, temporarily, you should feel fragile and vulnerable. And even something as simple as relaxing on your back takes a moment or two. And a natural sense of precaution and self-preservation sinks in. The point I'm trying to make is this is a good sign. Much like a bodybuilder saying, I was too weak to tie my own shoes, is a good sign. A momentary, temporary feeling of fragility and vulnerability is exactly the effect you're trying to feel in your bones in these postures. And hug your knees to your chest, please, cradling your legs. And then the hinging movement again. Hands under your hips, stretch your legs towards the ceiling. Bring your chin up, looking at your feet to engage the abdominal wall. Slowly bring your feet down. Hold the feet just above the floor for a breath or two, and then sit up all the way. Now, mongoose twist. Bring your left leg over your right, foot on the floor. Reach back and brace yourself with your right hand. Put your left elbow against your knee. And now here's the important part. Lift your butt up and lift and turn and twist. So your left buttock is lifting to turn your pelvis to that direction, but your arm is pushing off and resisting that motion. This creates the twist. Now, don't think of this as a static twist, because you don't have the leverage here with your elbow to stay there for a long time. It's a muscular relief before the next pose. So to slightly move your body and flex and wiggle and bend and contract, it's more of a yang posture. And then change sides, please. So the right foot comes over the left leg. Prop and support yourself with your left arm. Push that knee open with your arm or your elbow. Lift the hip up off the floor. And then resist that movement with your arm and twist and turn. What makes this a yang posture or a yang effort is you don't have the leverage to hold yourself in this position long enough to affect the deep fascia. So move the body subtly. Lift and bend and twist and contract, just like a little snake, searching for the tense parts in your body, the dead parts in your spine. And try to bring your mind there and squeeze them for a moment and release. And release, please. Now both legs are forward, caterpillar pose. Caterpillar, the feet can be together or hip width apart or anywhere in between those two extremes. And walk yourself down. You can relax your feet. There's no need to point or to flex them. We're not overly concerned in this particular variation with stretching the most out of your calves or the back of your knees. That's a very beneficial stretch. It's a very good stretch. That's not the intention of this particular sequence and this particular pose at this particular time. So just let the feet be relaxed. Take a comfortable grip. And again, just to remind you, in all forward bends, rounding the spine, dropping the head, exaggerates the decompression of the spine. This is a very important, very beneficial thing to do. But like anything, you can have too much of a good thing too soon. So it's very important, particularly when you're new to a practice like this, not to over-exaggerate and not to overdo. So if at any point you need to raise your head up or lift your chest up, and take a break from doing this posture because you're stressing too much the tissues of your spine and your pelvis, by all means do so. Take as long a break or a respite as you feel is beneficial or necessary. And if there is still time, bring your body back down into the pose. And again, remember, in all forward bends, bent legs or straight legs, one leg or both legs, in all forward bends, you might choose to make the effort to lift the chest and extend, to tilt the pelvis more aggressively, to affect the energy channels and tissues of the legs more aggressively. You sacrifice some of the stretch on your spine in order to increase some of the benefits for the legs. Perfectly legitimate variation. The other variation is to not contract the muscles of the spine, to let the spine round, because rounding of the spine is what exaggerates the stresses along the tissues of the backside of the spine and the muscles on each side. It will diminish somewhat the effect on your legs, but never completely. And it will increase somewhat the beneficial stresses and tractions on the spine. Particularly important, the lumbar spine and the pelvis. All of the spine, of course, but particularly important, the lumbar spine and the pelvis that are compressed vigorously, hours every day. Sitting in a chair is 4 times as compressive to your lumbar spine as standing. To take the time to decompress first the back side in a forward bend and the front side in a backward bend, the region of the pelvis and the spine, is very important, very beneficial, and very much needed by sedentary modern humanity. But again, steering now away from thoughts of biomechanics, advanced practitioners have long since reached the point where they're going to improve aesthetically in a pose like this. Once the body is laid flat across the legs, and your hands are resting easily gripping your feet, aesthetically, there's nowhere else to go. But each day, every day, the mental, emotional, and physical stresses of living tighten up the energy channels of the body, tighten up the fascia of the body, tighten up the muscles of the body. And for advanced practitioners, you reach this wonderful realm where it's no longer about, am I doing it further? Am I doing it better? And you sort of reach this magical place where it's, I'm just feeling good as I stay in the pose. And the longer I stay in it, the better I feel. It's a wonderful plateau in your practice when you reach that state. When aesthetics no longer drives you. When it's the innate, what you feel, intuitive, subjective experience of feeling your physical, emotional, and mental tensions melting away. And slowly relax on your backs, please. Yes, and the deep O sound. Remember, a momentary, temporary feeling of vulnerability, fragility, is what we want in a yin practice. It would not be very good to feel fragile and vulnerable in the middle of a sun salutation, because that's yang activity and the joints shouldn't be stressed that way. But in a yin practice, a momentary, temporary fragility is a sign of success. It stimulates the body to rebuild that area of the body stronger and more elastic. The feeling of fragility is temporary. It stimulates the life force of the body to rebuild us. And hug your knees to your chest again, please. Hands under your hips. Stretch your legs up and hinge slowly down with your head up looking forward to engage the abdominal wall. Taking a few breaths just before you come all the way up. Our climactic forward bend, the complete rounding of the spine, is accomplished through snail pose, an upside down curling rounding of the spine. And for some people, patting their neck, the small bones of the neck and spinous processes against the hard surface of the floor is absolutely necessary. For other people, it's not an issue. But if you use a pad like this, the important thing is that when you lay back, the back of your head is just off of the pad, and the edge of the towel or the blanket is cradled in the hollow of the neck. Now, the next most important consideration of this posture is we would like to stretch around the spine as much as is safe and therapeutic, but we would like to minimize the compression on the spine. So another way to say it is like we would like to exaggerate the tension or the stretching or the traction, and we would like to minimize the compression of the bones against the floor. And the way you do that is to rock your shoulder blades in the back of your arms under you once you're upside down. So if you would slowly roll yourself up and over into the snail pose. For some people, you won't be able to bring your feet down right away. For others, more flexible, it's easier. Now walk your shoulders under you so you feel you can support yourself in that position. Now, for about half of the people, depending on how they're constructed, once they've rocked themselves into this position, and they're supporting themselves in the back of their shoulders and their scapula, if they clasp their hands together, it actually helps hold them in that position. It can even take them deeper into a position of supporting themselves on the back of their arms and their shoulders. For other people, if they attempt that, it actually makes it worse to clasp their hands together. It pulls their shoulders out from under their body and puts direct compression on the bones of the upper spine and neck. And the only way to test this out is to do it yourself several times. Does it more helpful to clasp your hands behind your back, or does that actually prevent you from rolling your shoulders and your scapula under you? And just rough figures, half of the population will find this an easier, freer movement to roll the arm and the shoulder under to protect and lift the neck slightly. And roughly half of the rest of the people will find it more beneficial to clasp the hands together. That actually makes it easier to keep those arms positioned where they would like them to be. Experience and experiment. That is your guide. What's important to keep in mind is what is the intention. The intention is to minimize direct compression on the small spinous processes of the upper spine, upper thoracic, and the neck. At the same time maintaining or exaggerating the beneficial traction of the muscles and ligaments, not just in the upper spine, but in the neck as well. Now, one of the major considerations of this posture is, do you as the practitioner push your legs straight, and or do you bend your knees, pulling yourself aggressively into a rounded position, putting the most traction on the upper spine and neck? This is certainly a very beneficial pose. It's been done this way for a long time. But like everything else, it's not for everybody. It can, even if you have the capacities to do this variation of rolling high up onto the neck, high up onto the base of the head, you might also want to explore the variation of holding on to your calves or your legs or your feet and letting your pelvis roll down 1/3 or 1/2 of the way. This places stresses on different areas of the spine. Admittedly, it will now no longer be the most intense stretch of the very upper part of the thoracic spine and the neck, but it might be more beneficially decompressive for the middle or lower part of your spine. So it's important not to limit our conception of this pose to one way that it could or should be done. Better to simply recognize that in the variation of rolling as high up onto the shoulders as we can, we exaggerate the stresses on the neck and the upper spine, hopefully to our benefit. Whereas it's perfectly feasible, possible, and very likely that coming down to different positions, different heights, pressing different vertebral bodies against the floor as we roll down, have equally powerful beneficial effects. So this posture, more than perhaps than any of the other poses, could be done any number of various ways, all with the same or similar intent. Can I round and decompress my spine at the same time having my heart above the level of my head, which has very therapeutic benefits physiologically. And now, whatever your variation, slowly roll down. You can bend your knees if you like. No need to immediately engage your abdominal muscles. Just uncurl slowly, knees bent until your feet come to rest on the floor. And then again, just sort of wait and feel the fragility, the vulnerability, the dull to the bones ache that is temporary, that is momentary. It's not going to last. That feeling that you're experiencing in your practice now is going to stimulate the life force of the body to rebuild us stronger and more elastic. Anything can be overdone, and a beneficial therapeutic can be done too aggressively, too hard, too fast, too soon. But barring those considerations, a correct yin practice will always yield temporary, momentary feelings of fragility and vulnerability. This is the signs of a correct practice. And now we're about to shift gears, moving from long and deeper and more powerful forward bending of the spine to long and deeper and more powerful backward bending of the spine. And the first movement is going to be a transition from forward bending to backward bending. It's called the cattail pose. So if you draw your left knee up, extend the leg up into the air, and twist all the way over, and then try to move your thigh, your right thigh back by putting your toes on the floor and sort of scooching, or a slight little sliding movement of the thigh back. That's the key move. That movement locks that thigh into place. Now, propping your ear on or side of your head on with your hand, bend up that back furthest leg and catch hold of it. This is one variation of cattail pose. So if we look over at Cassandra, catching hold of the foot, pulling it in towards the buttock and the hip, exaggerates this stretch along the quadricep and hip flexor. This is one variation of this pose. Some people, this is where they stay for the entire time they're in this pose. But another perfectly legitimate variation is to, keeping hold of the foot, let it carry you back like a bow posture, dropping the head and the shoulder open so the spine rotates into a back bend. The stress is not as much on the thigh any longer, but there's a more complete rotation and spine bend in the spinal column. So once again, the two major variations are staying up, isolating the thigh with that grip, pulling that foot in. Or, as Susie is demonstrating, carrying the leg well back behind you, dropping the head back into a twisting, arcing back bend. Some people prefer one variation over the other. Other people find both different and equally effective. But again, the intention of why it was sequenced here at this time was we've done forward bend after forward bend after forward bend. And so now, in order to prepare the spine, the joints, and the discs, and the tissues, and the energies of the body to go opposite, let's introduce a twist, which is a neutralizing movement, with a gentle arching back bend. And slowly release your leg. Let your legs relax. Roll back onto your back in a natural, easy way. It's a little tricky to learn to get into this posture, but once you've found your way there, it's easy to find your way back, and believe it or not, it becomes quite natural. But I'll talk you through it as clearly as I can. If you draw your right knee up and then stretch your right leg and push it up and over to the left. The idea is you want to twist your pelvis and get on top of that thigh. So put your toes on the floor and move that knee and thigh back. It's almost as if you've turned onto the top of your left thigh. Once you've done that move, you've pretty much entered into cattail pose. The rest is details. Holding your head on your hands, bend the back leg, catch hold of the foot. And here are the two, again, the two major variations. Do you simply stay up on your hand, pulling the foot in towards your buttock to stretch and elongate the front of the thigh? Or do you carry it into the variation of let that foot move away from you and pull you back like a bow posture, and dropping the head and shoulder back, enter into a twisting back bend? Two different approaches to the same pose. Some people prefer stretching the thigh. Some people prefer twisting and rotating with an arch. Some people find both very effective, and they go from one variation for a minute or so to the other variation for a minute or so. In all back bends, you can use the muscles of the spine to exaggerate the back bend if you wish. And that does not impede or interfere with the yin effect. In all back bends, if you wish, you can squeeze and contract the muscles of the spine to deepen the arch or to deepen the twist, and it will not interfere or counteract the yin effect. So it's different than using the spinal muscles in forward bends. Spinal muscles in forward bends had a huge impact on how it affected you. But using your muscles in a back bend, if you choose to, are not counterproductive. It actually takes you deeper. And sometimes a slight squeezing and then a relaxing, moving, subtle pulsations and explorations can really enliven the spine. So don't fall into a dogmatic point of view that because you're doing a yin practice, you don't move and you don't use your muscles. Remember, nothing is absolute. Trust your instincts. Stay true to the principles, but trust your instincts and adapt your efforts and your postures to your unique body. And slowly release. Let the legs carry down and away from you and roll back naturally and gently onto your spine. Hug your knees to your chest, cradle your legs. And again, hinge, hands under your hips, stretch your legs up, and slowly bring them down. Bring your head up, looking at your feet, and come all the way up. And then if you would, turn and lay onto your belly. A series of 3 back bends. Infant pose, seal pose, saddle pose. First, a very young, preparatory infant pose. Arms back like you're flying. Raise your head and your chest up. You can have your feet together or apart, knees bent or straight. I want you to feel the most comfortable squeezing the muscles of your buttocks and your spine, so the spine is completely invigorated and energized with a strong, brief, young, momentary effort. No shocks to the spine after all those forward bends. And slowly down, please. And then, seal pose. Bring your hands, palms forward somewhere near your shoulders. This varies depending on how flexible you are and what your proportions are. With some practice, your hand position will become easy and normal to find. Now slowly elevate your torso until your arms are extended. If you find it particularly difficult to do this posture, walk your hands a little forward. If even that is not enough, we could have Susie demonstrate. If this is too much stress on the spine, drop to your forearms. You can always get too much of a good thing. So never over push anything simply based on blind following of principles. Everybody's different. And what's beneficial and healthy for one person to do would be injurious and unsafe for another person to do. When in doubt, always err on the side of safety. If you have any concerns about whether or not the stresses that you're subjecting your spine to or any part of your body to in these long holds is injurious, always err on the side of safety. There's nothing to be gained by making a heroic mistake. Now, your variations here are: how wide are your hands? How wide are your legs? And then finally, are the shoulders elevated, making it easier for the arms to be extended? Are the shoulders depressed and pulled backwards, squeezing more aggressively the compression of the spine? Now, for some people, that squeezing and depression of the scapula feels like heaven to them. For other people, it exaggerates too much the already strong vectors of force this posture engenders in the spine. And particularly for modern peoples, this is where we're most afraid: the lower spine and the sacrum. We never feel it, we never address it, unless something is terribly wrong. So fear and trepidation about this area of the body is pretty much universal in the classes that I've taught. So I'm not encouraging you to be foolish and reckless and over-aggressive. You can injure yourself in this posture. I am encouraging you to look past your fears a bit and slowly and gently explore ranges of motion. Because kept within limits, stressing your spine will stimulate the life force to rebuild it stronger and more flexible than before, within limits. If it's not stressed in this and similar ways, it will degenerate. And slowly, slowly down. Oh. Now here's a key point. I'd like you to push back into child's pose, to flex the spine gently the opposite way. As you push back, you're likely to move very slowly. Such a simple movement, and yet you instinctively move very slowly to protect the spine. Everyone does. Here's the significant part. What you are waiting for, why you are moving slowly, is not your muscles. You're waiting for your connective tissue. The connective tissue does not snap back like muscle. Staying in a pose for 30 seconds, you're not going to have this feeling in your spine because the connective tissue won't yield. Staying in a pose for 3 minutes, the connective tissue is minutely affected. And so even going back to a gentle pose like child's pose, simple, easy, there's a moment of precaution because the connective tissues take time to respond. One last climactic spinal movement. Saddle pose. If you'd come up and move forward onto your mat. We've done this before in the hip series because of its benefits for the thighs. We do it now in the spine series because of its beneficial pressure on the sacrum and lumbar spine. The thighs and the lumbar spine intimately connected. So sitting on your feet the way Susie is, between your feet the way Brian and Cassandra are, and between the feet the way all three of you are sitting, slowly lower yourself backwards. For Torsten to go back without using a bolster would be hazardous to his health. Let the knees find an easy place. Do not conspire to hold them at any particular stressful position. If you look, you see Susie sitting on her feet, legs wide. Next comes Torsten sitting between his feet, legs wide. Then we come to Brian sitting between his feet, legs fairly parallel. And finally, Cassandra sitting between her feet, legs nearly parallel. And if you have the flexibilities for it, you can actually flex your feet, turning your feet out. This actually exaggerates the internal rotation at the hip, getting a more beneficial stress along the thighs and the hips. But I hope it's probably needless to point out, not that many people have this type of flexibility. You have it or you don't. So never attempt to do things like this if you have any natural hesitation. This posture is intended to stress the tissues of the top of the thigh and the quadricep and the hip flexors here, which have a controlling effect on the tilt of the pelvis. So these flexibilities here are very important for how the pelvis is free to tilt or not. Related to that is on the back side of the body, the arching pressure into the sacrum. That pressure on the lumbar spine and on the sacrum is compression. This stress here on the front of the hip and the thigh, this is tension. But on the back side, compression. The reason for compression is we're trying to put strong vectors of force against the sacrum. The sacrum, like any other joint of the body, but more than any other joint of the body, tends to become fixated as we age, which is exactly like it sounds. The joint surfaces bind so closely together, and the ligaments binding those joints together become so tight that after a time, if it's not routinely exercised in yoga like this, we lose the iliosacral joint. If a joint doesn't move, we've effectively lost it. This is the quote-unquote natural aging process, to lose this facility of this joint. And it's scary and frightening for many people to try to put any stresses into their sacrum and lower back, whether it's forward bends or backward bends. And if there's one thing this sequence of postures has done, is to aggressively address that area. Not aggressively addressing it with force, but with time. Spending adequate time so that the connective tissues start to yield. And once again, you can do anything too much, too soon. You could injure yourself, your knees, your feet, your back, in a posture like this. So, to finish, as in forward bends, you could exaggerate the effect above or below your pelvis depending on how you position your pelvis. You can do the same in this pose. If you wish, you can try to use your stomach to tuck your pelvis, taking the arch out of your back and exaggerating the stress on your hip flexors and your thighs. This is a perfectly legitimate, valuable variation. But it is just as valuable in a different way to not engage the muscles of the abdomen and to allow the arch to be gently pressed into the lumbar spine and the sacrum. This is the curve we lose when we age. This curve. So rather than fight against it with your abdomen, I would encourage you in this posture to allow it to happen. That being said, time is up. There are two ways out of this pose. The first way is to just use your arms and your elbows to bring your whole torso up. The second way is either one leg at a time, slowly release a knee, and then the other, or both legs at a time. Needless to say, not everyone has the flexibilities to lay flat on their back and release their legs. But if you do, that's usually the comfortable, easy way to do it. However you've done it, would you rock yourself up into a sitting position and step back into downward dog, treading your knees and your calves and swaying your hips and bringing some blood and some chi back into your spine and your hips and your ankles and your feet and your legs. And when you feel you've done that adequately, just rest for a moment in child's pose, gently stretching your spine. let's finish. Gently raise yourself up into a kneeling position. Sitting on your feet, place your hands, palms turned upward on your lap. Close your eyes. Take one deep breath and then just exhale and let it go. Try to feel your energy descend to your belly, to the lower belly below your navel, the dantian. And then to finish, bring your hands, palms together, and raise the energy to your heart.